Italy gave the world some of the most celebrated cuisine in history. Almost none of it was invented by people who could afford to eat well. Number 20. Acqua cotta. The name means cooked water. That is not a metaphor. In the Tuscan Maremma in the 1940s, a pot of water went on the stove. An onion. Whatever wild herbs grew close to the house. The water simmered until it tasted of something. Stale bread in the bowl first. Hot liquid over it. If there was an egg that day, one egg for the household, it was cracked in and left to set in the residual heat. If there was no egg, nobody mentioned it. A Maremma household in 1948 might spend 15 lire on that onion. Everything else cost nothing. It grew by the road or was already in the kitchen. The version with the egg was the good version. The version without was the one you made in March, when the hens had stopped laying. This was not an unusual meal. This was Tuesday. Pane e pomodoro, bread and tomato. A ripe tomato cut in half. Stale bread, 2 days old. Rub the tomato face down across the bread until the pulp soaks in. Salt, olive oil, nothing cooked. It only works with a real tomato. A garden tomato, warm from the sun, thick-walled. The watery supermarket variety makes wet bread. The original made something that people who grew up eating it still describe with a specific kind of reverence. Not quite nostalgia, more like the memory of something that cannot quite be reproduced. A kilo of tomatoes cost 30 lire in Bari in 1955. The oil cost almost nothing, because the olive trees were everywhere and everyone had some. Many of them still make it every August when the tomatoes are ripe. They have never stopped. Number 18. Sugo finto, the sauce that named what was missing. Italy has a tradition of naming dishes after what they do not contain. Sugo finto means fake sauce. It is made exactly like a meat ragu, with sofrito, wine, and a long simmer, but without the meat. The idea was that the meat had escaped. Scappato is the other name, sugo scappato, the escaped sauce. Trippa finta replaces trepe with a frittata cut into strips. In Puglia, there is zuppa a pesce fihute, fish soup where the fish are fugitives. No fish in the pot, just the idea of fish. Italian peasant families name their food with the kind of dark humor that only comes from real scarcity. In Tuscany in 1956, 1 kilo of onions, celery, and carrots cost 20 lire. Done correctly, the sofrito produces enough depth to make the rest of the meal feel like enough. Servants in noble houses made this for their own families when the masters had meat. They gave it a name. That name is the whole story. Number 17. Pasta e fagioli. But not the version you know. The restaurant version often has prosciutto, and sometimes cream. The original was simple. Dried cannellini beans were soaked overnight, then cooked for 2 hours with a ham bone that had already made soup 3 times and had nothing left to give. Broken spaghetti was added at the end, not broken deliberately, but broken because they were the fragments at the bottom of the bag, too short to use any other way. Olive oil on top, salt. A kilo of beans cost 80 lire in 1958. It fed a family of 5 for dinner and left enough for lunch the next day. Cannellini in Tuscany, borlotti in the Veneto, chickpeas in Rome, fava in Sicily. The bean changed, the principle never did. The broken pasta was not a compromise. It was the point. Nothing went back in that bag. Number 16, frittata di pasta. The invention. Nobody wrote down. There was leftover pasta from the night before. Not enough for a meal. Too much to throw away. Nobody wrote this down as a recipe for centuries. It appeared in cookbooks only after it had already been made in every kitchen in Naples for 300 years. Beat 2 eggs. Add the cold pasta. Stir until the strands are coated. Heat a pan and add olive oil. Press the pasta flat, cook until firm, and then flip it. What came out was neither an omelet nor pasta. It was a dense, savory cake, eaten hot from the pan or wrapped in newspaper and carried to a construction site. No plate was needed, no fork, no reheating. Workers in Naples carried this in their jacket pockets in the 1950s. The children ate the leftovers for breakfast the next morning. It was considered a treat. Number 15. Polenta e niente. Polenta and nothing. In the Veneto and Lombardy in the 1940s, polenta was not a side dish. It was the meal, every meal, for most of the rural population, for close to 200 years. A kilo of cornmeal cost 60 lira, and it fed a family for 2 days. At its peak around 1900, there were 100,000 documented cases of pellagra in Italy each year. It was a disease caused by niacin deficiency, producing skin lesions, dementia, diarrhea, and death. The mental asylums of Venice were full of what doctors called pellagrous insanity, severe neurological damage from eating nothing but corn for decades. The disease was called malatia del padrone, the landlord's illness. Not because landlords got it, but because landlords caused it. Polenta was cheap. Polenta was filling. Polenta was killing people slowly. Nobody in authority found that urgent enough to address for 200 years. In 1951, the Italian government published a survey of rural diets in the South. 47% of families ate meat fewer than 3 times per year. Not 3 times per week, 3 times per year. These families were not making choices. They were working under the mezzadria system, sharecropping that required half the harvest as rent, a structure that ran largely unchanged from the medieval period until after World War II. When 4 million Italians emigrated to the United States between 1876 and 1930, they did not bring nostalgia for this food. A historian named John Dickey documented it plainly. Envy, anger, and ambition marked their attitude to eating when they left. They added meat to every dish the moment they could afford it. They fed their children chicken on Sundays because they had never had chicken on a Sunday in their lives. We turned their survival food into something romantic. They would find that baffling. Number 14. Ribollita. Day 1 is soup. Day 4 is better. Ribollita means reboiled. Bean and vegetable soup on Monday. Reboiled Tuesday. On Wednesday, you tore stale Tuscan bread without salt because of a trade war with Pisa in the 12th century that Florence never got over, into the pot and reboiled again. By Thursday, everything had collapsed into something thick enough to eat with a fork. The fourth version was better than the first. Every cook who made ribollita in the 1940s knew this. A political standoff from the Middle Ages created the ideal ingredient, unsalted bread that absorbed everything without dissolving, for the most important dish in Florentine peasant cooking. Nobody planned that. Number 13. Macco di Fave. 2,000 years, almost unchanged. Dried fava beans cooked until they fully disintegrated, beaten into a dense pale puree. Olive oil on top, salt, sometimes wild fennel. The Romans ate this. Sicilian peasants ate it in 1960 using almost exactly the same method. A kilo of dried fava beans cost 40 lira. Dense with calories, filling in a way that lighter foods were not. I want to be honest about what 2,000 years of continuity means here. It does not mean the dish was a beloved tradition. It means the circumstances did not change in 2,000 years. The bean worked, so the bean stayed. Macco is now on the menu in a few restaurants in Palermo. They charge 12 euros for it and describe it as authentic Sicilian heritage. 2,000 years of necessity, cleaned up and priced for the curious. Number 12. Pangrattato. Poor man's Parmesan. Stale bread, ground into crumbs. Toasted in olive oil with garlic and sometimes dried chili until golden and crackling. Then the crumbs are put on pasta in place of cheese. It was called openly Il Parmigiano dei Poveri. A wheel of real Parmesan cost more than a Tuscan farm laborer earned in 2 weeks. Old bread costs nothing. Fried correctly in good oil, the crumbs produce a nutty roasted crunch that is different from Parmesan. Not worse, different. Food writers now call this technique textural contrast, and listed as a mark of advanced Italian cooking. Several Michelin-starred restaurants currently serve pangrattato as a signature element. The cost of a portion in Florence today is roughly the same as a kilogram of actual Parmesan. Number 11. Papa al pomodoro, stale bread and tomatoes. Stale bread soaked in cold water, squeezed dry. Garlic, tomatoes, basil, olive oil. Everything cooked together for 30 minutes, stirring constantly until the bread and tomatoes had merged into a thick, uniform, deeply savory mash. Not a soup, not a sauce. The stale bread was the point. Fresh bread dissolves immediately. Day 5 bread held just long enough to absorb everything and still be something. There is a children's song about this dish. Viva la papa col pomodoro. Long live bread mush with tomatoes. Their grandmothers had been making it out of necessity for 200 years. By the 1960s, it had become comfortable enough, distant enough from real hunger, to be charming. A restaurant near the Ponte Vecchio currently charges 18 euros for a bowl. The grandmother who invented their version spent nothing on it. Number 10. Lardo on bread. Lardo is cured fatback. It is pure pig fat packed in marble basins with sea salt, rosemary, garlic, and black pepper for 6 months. The result is thin white slices that melt immediately on contact with anything warm. In the marble quarries of Colonnata in the 1950s, workers cut through blocks that weighed 800 kilograms of the same marble all day. They ate lardo on stale bread as their midday meal. It was dense with calories, enough to keep a man swinging a hammer through the afternoon. A block of lardo cost almost nothing in 1952. It was the food of people who could not afford anything else. Today, a small jar of lardo di Colonnata sells in specialty food shops across Europe for between 12 and 20 euros. The quarry workers would find that extremely funny. Number 9. Pasta con le sarde. 1,000 years of ingredients. Sicilian fishermen made this on the boats. Fresh sardines, wild fennel from the hillsides above Palermo, pine nuts, raisins, sometimes saffron. Pasta cooked in sardine-scented water. The combination sounds wrong, fish and raisins together. It is not wrong. The raisins are Sicilian Arabic influence from the 9th to the 11th century. The fennel is older, Greek. The sardines are just what was caught. 1 kilo cost 50 lira at a Palermo market in 1957. The dish assembled itself from 1,000 years of people trading, settling, and fishing on the same island, leaving their ingredients behind. It has been on Sicilian tables in roughly this form since then. 1,000 years is a long time for a recipe not to change. Usually that means the original was already correct. Number 8. Fave e cicoria. 500 years on the same plate. Dried fava beans cooked into a thick puree. Wild chicory gathered from the same fields, blanched, dressed with olive oil, put on the same plate. In Puglia, in the 1960s, the chicory grew wild between the fava rows. You went to the field in the morning and came back with dinner already in your hands. The bitterness of the chicory cut through the weight of the beans. The beans absorbed the oil and became rich where the chicory was lean. In 1965, a plate of fave e cicoria in a working-class trattoria in Lecce cost 30 lire. The exact same dish now costs 14 euros in that city and is described on the menu as traditional peasant cuisine. The description is accurate. The price is not. Number 7. Trippa alla Romana. Saturday morning, without exception. Tripe, beef stomach, was the cheapest cut at any Roman butcher in the 1950s. About 120 lire per kilo, when other cuts were 4 or 5 times that. Wealthy households would not buy it. Their refusal was what made it available. Boiled for 2 hours, cut into strips, then cooked with tomatoes, fresh mint, and grated pecorino romano. Roman working-class families ate this every Saturday morning. It had a name, Il Sabato delle Tripe. Poorer families ate it because they had to. Then working families ate it because it was good. Then it became a Roman institution. Street vendors still sell trippa sandwiches near the Central Market in Rome. The Saturday line is still long. Some things do not need to be revived because they never quite left. Between 1958 and 1963, Italy went through the Miracolo Economico, the economic miracle. Industrial output doubled. Wages tripled in the north. Supermarkets opened. Advertising told Italian families that modern eating meant packaged products and things in clean boxes. The old dishes did not disappear because they tasted worse. They disappeared because eating them in public had become a statement about where you came from. Poverty was the thing to escape. The food of poverty went with it. One generation. That was all it took. If you ask an older Italian who grew up in the post-war years whether they were cooking cucina povera, they will laugh at you. They were not cooking cucina povera. They were cooking. That is just what food was. The romantic label is ours, invented by food writers with full refrigerators who had the luxury of finding scarcity picturesque. Number 6. Bruschetta. Before it became a starter. Not the restaurant version. Not the chopped tomatoes with balsamic reduction. The original was stale bread placed on dying coals, burnt black on both sides, rubbed immediately with a raw garlic clove while still hot, and then olive oil was poured over while the bread was still absorbing it. That is the complete dish. In Umbria, in the 1950s, this was how November olive oil was tasted the day it was pressed. Farmers toasted stale bread over fire, poured new oil over it, and that was how they knew whether the harvest was good. An agricultural economy evaluated its most important product on a piece of week-old bread and an open flame. What is now served in restaurants as a starter was once the instrument of an entire industry. Number 5. Castagnaccio, the cake with no sugar and no eggs. Chestnut flour, water, olive oil, pine nuts, raisins, and rosemary pressed into the top before baking. That is a cake. No sugar. Chestnuts are sweet enough when ground into flour. No eggs, because eggs were expensive. The first documented reference to Castagnaccio appears in a book from 1553. Chestnuts were called il pane dei poveri, the bread of the poor, because the trees grew wild in the hills and anyone could gather them free in autumn. After World War II, as white flour became cheap and incomes rose, Castagnaccio disappeared. It was the food of people with nothing, and those people now had more than nothing. There is a legend attached to it. If you make Castagnaccio with rosemary and give it to someone, they will fall in love with you and ask to marry you. Poor people making a cake out of tree flour and water felt moved to attach a love story to it rather than just a recipe. Number 4. Lampredotto. Florence's street food that refused to disappear. The fourth stomach of the cow. Simmered for 3 hours in salted water with tomatoes, onion, and celery. Sliced thin, piled into a crusty roll, the top half dipped in cooking broth. Salsa verde or chili oil on top. Florence vendors sold this from wooden carts near the Mercato Centrale for 20 lire in the 1950s. The lampredotto cost almost nothing. It was what the butcher was going to throw away. Workers ate it standing in the street before their shifts. Most of what is on this list has disappeared. Lampredotto has not. The carts are still there on Saturday mornings. The line is still long. The dish costs 4 or 5 euros now instead of 20 lire. But the animal, the method, and the logic are exactly what they were in 1952. Some things survive because they are genuinely too good to abandon. Number 3. Pane cunzato. Name dressed. What it does not say is why. A thick slice of Sicilian sesame bread, rubbed with tomato until wet, topped with 2 or 3 salted anchovies, a spoonful of capers, a slice of tuma cheese, dried oregano, and olive oil. That is the entire dish. Messina fishermen made this before going out in the morning. They needed something that held for 6 hours in the heat of a boat hull with no refrigeration. The anchovies and capers were preserved. The oil kept the bread from hardening. The oregano masked whatever the anchovies smelled like by midday. In 1971, food researcher Ansel Keys, whose Mediterranean diet work changed how the Western world thought about eating, documented pane cunzato while studying Sicilian coastal communities. He described it as the most nutritionally complete portable meal he had encountered in any working population during his research. He had not been looking for it. He found it because it was simply what the fishermen ate. No modern sports nutrition product has matched its shelf stability or calorie-to-weight ratio in 50 years of trying. It was not engineered. It was arrived at over centuries by people who needed to eat while being very far from a kitchen. The fishermen did not know any of this. They knew it was lunch. Number 2, ciabatta, the dish with no recipe. That is not an oversight. At the end of August, when the garden had given almost everything it had, you put whatever was left into a pan with olive oil. Eggplant going soft. Peppers sitting too long. Wrinkled tomatoes. Last week's potatoes. Onions. Cooked together for an hour without adding water. The vegetables released their own liquid. The oil bound everything. After an hour, something thick and sweet and savory remained, each vegetable still partially distinct, but all of them having given something to the shared pan. There is no canonical recipe because there was never meant to be one. The dish was the answer to one question. What is in the garden right now that needs to be used? It fed millions of people for hundreds of years and is almost entirely absent from restaurant menus today. Not because it is difficult, because it cannot be standardized, because it was never meant to be the same thing twice. Number 1, stale bread. Not a preparation. The ingredient itself, a loaf of Altamura bread, baked on Sunday, weighed up to 2 kilos. By Wednesday, it was hard. By Sunday, it was stone, and it was used for everything. Day 1, eaten as bread. Day 2, rubbed with tomato. Day 3, panzanella. Day 4, torn into ribollita. Day 5, papa al pomodoro. Day 6, aquacotta. Day 7, squeezed into frittata or ground into pangrattato. Nothing went back. There was no bag. The bread sat on the wooden board until nothing was left. Most of the dishes on this list exist because of what bread does when it is 3 days old, 5 days old, 7 days old. The entire tradition is a continuous act of not wasting the one thing the family reliably had. That knowledge is almost completely gone. Not because the bread changed, because the hunger did. Make one of these this week. Tell me in the comments which one and whether anyone in your family still makes it. If you have someone old enough to have cooked this way, ask them. Now, not eventually. Because that is the one thing on this list that cannot be recovered from a recipe book.